The coffee hit the floor before anyone moved. Not the cup. Just the coffee, a full dark stream of it, pouring off the edge of the circulation desk because the woman in the cream cashmere coat had swept her hand across it without so much as glancing down. She was already talking, already looking somewhere else, already performing for the man standing 2 steps behind her. "I don't understand why this takes so long," she said. "It's a library card, not a mortgage application." The woman behind the desk didn't flinch. She reached for the paper towels she kept on the lower shelf, the ones she'd started keeping there 2 weeks into the job. Because spills happened, and she'd learned not to wait for someone else to handle them. She pressed the towels to the desk quietly, methodically, the way someone does when they've made peace with the fact that no one is watching them do it. Her name was Wren Halliday. She wore a burgundy cardigan and reading glasses she didn't technically need, and her hair was pulled back into a low knot that made her look, if you weren't paying attention, like someone's helpful aunt. She had been the head of collections for the Hargrove Public Library System for 11 years. 3 weeks ago, she had been appointed interim director of the entire branch network, 6 locations, 84 staff, a renovation budget the size of a small municipal contract. After the previous director retired abruptly following a funding dispute with the board had asked her to do a quiet assessment before the formal announcement. She had suggested doing it from the inside. They had looked at her the way people look at someone who's just proposed something slightly inconvenient and completely correct, and then they had agreed. She had been working the front circulation desk of the Dunmore Branch for 4 days. Nobody here knew who she was. The man behind the woman in cashmere was named Trevor Ashworth. He was 39, the branch's assistant operations manager, and he had the particular energy of someone who had learned to perform competence without having to demonstrate it too often. He wore his ID badge clipped to his jacket lapel the way some people wore a credential. Visibly importantly, slightly too high. He had been with the Hargrove system for 6 years. In that time he had received 2 commendations and been passed over for the director role twice. And he had not fully forgiven the institution for either of those things. The woman he'd brought in was his girlfriend Lydia. Wren didn't know her last name yet. She knew the coat, the way Lydia moved through the library like it was a hotel lobby she hadn't chosen, and the particular expression she wore when addressing staff. Not quite contempt, but the cousin of it. Polite enough to avoid a complaint, not kind enough to be confused for actual politeness. "You need to set up a new account," Wren said, turning back to her screen. "The previous card was registered under a different address. It takes a few minutes." "A few minutes," Lydia repeated the phrase the way a person repeats of something they find mildly absurd. "Yes, of Trevor." Lydia turned and looked at him, not asking for help, confirming that he was witnessing her being inconvenienced. Trevor looked at Wren. "Can you expedite it?" "I'm already working as quickly as the system allows," Wren said. She did not look up. There was a small silence. Lydia picked up a bookmark from the display rack near the desk. One of the children's reading program bookmarks, a cartoon fox holding an open book, looked at it with the specific expression of someone who has decided to be unimpressed by everything in a room, and set it back down. "Do you even have the new Callaway release?" she asked. "The one that was in the Globe last weekend?" "We have it on order. It should be in within the week." "Should be." She said it to Trevor, not to Wren. Trevor almost smiled. He caught himself. "It's fine, Lydia." "I'm not saying it's not fine," Lydia said pleasantly. "I'm just noting that for a flagship branch, the collection feels a little." She paused, selecting the word carefully. "Provincial." Wren typed the last field into the system and pressed enter. The printer beside her produced a new library card with a soft mechanical sound that was in that moment more satisfying than it had any right to be. "Your card," she said and placed it on the desk. Lydia picked it up without looking at Wren and dropped it into her bag. They walked away. Trevor Ashworth glanced back once, briefly, the way people do when they want to check whether they've been observed doing something they're not quite proud of. Wren watched him go, then she reached for a new paper towel and finished cleaning up the coffee. The Dunmore Branch was not the flagship. It was the 4th largest of the 6, tucked into a neighborhood that had been working class 30 years ago, aspirationally gentrifying for the last 15, and had landed somewhere in the middle. A Portuguese bakery next to a matcha cafe next to a hardware store that had been there since 1978. The library itself was a 1960s building with a recent addition that had been built with intentions and a compromised budget, and the result was 2 architectural personalities that had never quite been introduced to each other. The staff were good though. Wren had noticed that immediately. There was Petra, not the Petra from the file, a 26-year-old library technician, named Petra Valdez, who handled the children's section with a calm efficiency that Wren recognized as the kind of competence that never gets celebrated because it never fails publicly. There was Kwame, the reference librarian, who could find you a source on anything in under 4 minutes, and never made you feel stupid for not knowing where to look. There was June, who was 61 and worked the afternoon shift, and had clearly seen every variety of human behavior the public library attracts, and who processed it all with the equanimity of someone who had simply stopped being surprised. And there was Trevor, who managed the operation side and who Wren was still reading. He was not cruel. She wanted to be precise about that. He wasn't the kind of manager who undermined people openly, or raised his voice or played favorites in ways that everyone could see. But he had a habit, small, consistent, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, of standing slightly apart when something went wrong, of being present enough to have witnessed it, but not present enough to have had to respond to it, of letting a situation resolve itself or not resolve itself, and then appearing afterward with a measured comment about what could have gone better. Lydia's behavior at the desk had not surprised him. That was the part Wren kept returning to. Not that he hadn't intervened. She understood on some level the complicated geography of a relationship, but that he had watched it without discomfort, without the small involuntary shift in posture that most people experience when someone they're with is being unkind. He had watched it the way you watch something that is simply part of the landscape. That told her something. On her second day, a patron had come in distressed. A man in his 60s, heavy coat despite the warmth, trying to print something for a medical appointment and unable to navigate the public computer station. Wren had been in the middle of cataloging a returns cart. She had stepped away from the cart and helped him. It had taken 12 minutes. When Trevor came through on his afternoon walkthrough, he had looked at the cart, still half-loaded, and said to Wren, not unkindly but not particularly kindly either, "We try to clear returns before the afternoon rush." "I was helping a patron with printing," Wren said. "Right," Trevor said, and made a small note on his clipboard. "Just worth keeping the workflow in mind." Quam, at the reference desk nearby, had looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had heard this particular note played before. Wren had said nothing. She'd gone back to the cart. That evening she had written 2 pages in the small notebook she kept in her cardigan pocket. The incident with the photocopier happened on Thursday. A group of university students had come in to use the study rooms, and one of them, a young woman named according to the booking system, Amaros, had stayed late and accidentally left her laptop bag in study room C. She'd come back for it 40 minutes after closing, slightly panicked, and the junior staff member on closing. That night, a part-timer named Ben had called Trevor because he wasn't sure whether to let her retrieve it or make her come back in the morning. Trevor had told Ben to tell her to come back in the morning. Wren was still in the building, in the back office, reviewing service usage data from the last quarter. She heard Ben's side of the call. She heard the pause when he relayed the answer. She came out of the office, asked Ben what the situation was, listened, and then walked to the front door where Amara was standing on the other side of the glass. Young, tired, winter coat, backpack, the expression of someone who desperately needs something to go right today. Wren let her in. She walked her to study room C. She waited while Amara collected her bag. She walked her back out. "Thank you," Amara said at the door. I thought I was going to have to tell my professor." She stopped, exhaled. "Thank you. It's fine," Wren said. "Have a safe night." She went back to the data. The next morning, Trevor came in and Ben told him what had happened. Trevor came to find Wren at the circulation desk. "I made a call about the situation last night," he said. "Protocol is that after-hours retrieval goes through a formal process." "I know the protocol," Wren said. "So you'll understand why going around it creates issues." "I understand why the protocol exists," Wren said, looking at him levelly. "I also made a judgment call about a student who needed her belongings and posed no security risk. I'm comfortable with that call." Trevor held her gaze for a moment. She noticed that he wasn't quite sure what to do with someone who didn't fold. Most people at the circulation desk folded. It was an almost physical reflex. The slight drop of the shoulders, the deferential recalibration. Wren didn't do it, and something about that was creating a small, unresolved interference in Trevor's understanding of the hierarchy here. He said, "Just keep me in the loop," and walked away. Petra, restocking the new release display 3 feet to Wren's right, murmured without turning around. "Nobody's ever said that to him before." "Said what?" Wren asked. "I'm comfortable with that call." Petra placed a book on the shelf. "People usually just apologize." Lydia came back on Friday. This time alone, late morning, in dark jeans and a different coat. Charcoal wool, still expensive. And she moved through the stacks with her phone out, texting, navigating around other patrons with the spatial awareness of someone who considers their trajectory the one that shouldn't have to adjust. She stopped at the new release wall and stood in front of it for a while, scrolling on her phone with one hand and tilting her head at the spines with the other. Then she pulled out 2 books, tucked them under her arm, and came to the desk. Wren scanned her card. "You don't have the Callaway," Lydia said. "Not yet, no. Still on order. I asked the librarian about it." She said librarian with a very slight weight on it, as though the category was inherently approximate. "He said it might be 2 weeks." "That sounds right." Lydia looked at Wren. It was the first time she had actually looked at her, not at the desk, not at the screen, but at Wren specifically. There was a brief moment of assessment that was almost clinical. "You're new," Lydia said. "Relatively. Where were you before this?" "Administration," Wren said, which was accurate. Lydia looked at the desk, the shelving cart, the worn patch on the counter where thousands of books had been slid across. "Do you enjoy it? The desk work?" The question was not cruel. It was more unsettling than cruelty because it was genuinely curious. The kind of curiosity that doesn't consider whether the question might land oddly on the person receiving it. The curiosity of someone who has never had to wonder how work looks from the inside of it. "I find it useful," Wren said. Lydia seemed to accept this as an incomplete but sufficient answer. She took her books, glanced once more around the branch as though revising an opinion she hadn't quite formed yet, and left. Wren watched the door close behind her. June, coming up from the lower level with an armload of periodicals, appeared beside her. "Trevor's girlfriend." "I know, she was in here last week too, before you started. Said our fiction section had significant gaps." June set the periodicals on the desk with a small thump. "I told her the collection is curated according to community usage data," she said. "Well, someone should look at that data." June picked up the top periodical and began sorting. "I've been looking at that data for 18 years. Wren said nothing for a moment, then, "What did Trevor do?" "Smiled," June said. "The way he does." Not agreeing with her, not disagreeing, just present. Wren thought about the small note on the clipboard, the call he'd made about Amara's laptop bag, the way he moved through the building, capable, smooth, and somehow never quite in the room when the room needed something from him. She wrote another half-page in the notebook that evening. The board meeting was in 10 days. Before that, Wren had agreed to compile a staffing assessment for the Dunmore Branch. Not a performance review, not formally, but an honest picture of the team. Where the strengths were, where the gaps were, what the branch needed to function well under a new director and a renovation that was going to complicate everything for 18 months. She had been watching. That was in the end the job she'd been asked to do, not to find failures. She had said that to the board chair, a pragmatic woman named, nothing in the file, so she'd call her what she was, a pragmatic woman named the board chair. And the board chair had looked at her across the table and said, "Then what are you looking for?" And Wren had said, "I want to know who this branch actually is. Not what it looks like on the metrics." The board chair had nodded the way people nod when something confirms what they already hoped. The moment that settled it happened on a Wednesday. It was midday, quiet, the specific lull that falls in a public library between the morning seniors programming and the after-school rush. A woman had come in with 2 children, a girl of about 7 and a boy of maybe 4, and had gone to the computer stations to work on something, while the kids looked at picture books in the children's corner. The 4-year-old had, after a while, wandered toward the front of the building. The way small children do, with the absolute certainty of someone who believes the world will arrange itself around their direction of travel. He had ended up near the circulation desk, looking at a spinning rack of bookmarks, and had pulled the rack too hard, and the whole thing had tipped and scattered 47 bookmarks across the floor, in a bright, chaotic spread. He looked at the bookmarks. He looked up at Wren. His face did the specific calculation that 4-year-old faces do when they're deciding whether what just happened is funny or catastrophic. Wren came around the desk and sat down on the floor cross-legged, the way you have to sit with small children if you want them to feel like the world isn't all vertical lines above them. "Okay," she said. "You sort by color, I'll sort by shape." He looked at her. Then he sat down too, and began picking up bookmarks with the focused seriousness of a child given a real task. They were on the floor together for about 6 minutes. His mother appeared, mortified, apologizing, reaching to gather the child and the bookmark simultaneously. Wren told her it was completely fine, handed back the last handful of bookmarks and stood up. Trevor had been watching from the doorway to the back office. She didn't know how long he'd been there. When she looked over, he turned and went back through the door. That afternoon he came to the desk with his clipboard and said, without preamble, "I put in a note to facilities about that bookmark rack. The base is loose. Should have been flagged weeks ago." Wren looked at him. "Thank you, Trevor." He nodded. He started to walk away, then stopped. "You're good with patrons," he said. It came out slightly stiff, the way a compliment does when it's genuine but the person giving it isn't entirely comfortable with the act of giving it. "It's the job," Wren said. "Yeah." He paused. "Not everyone sees it that way." He went back to the office. Wren stood at the desk for a moment. Then she opened the notebook and drew a small line under his name. Not a strike through it, just a line. The kind that means still reading. The staff meeting was the following Tuesday. Trevor ran it, as he ran all the branch operational meetings, organized, efficient, a standing agenda that moved at a consistent pace. Wren sat at the end of the table with a cup of coffee, and her cardigan and her low knot and her notebook. Midway through, Trevor raised the issue of the after-hours retrieval situation. reframed at the meeting as a general reminder about protocol and communication chains. He didn't name Ren. He spoke in the institutional second person. When situations come up outside normal hours, we want to make sure the right people are informed. Everyone at the table knew who the reminder was for. Kwame looked at his pen, June looked at the window, Petra looked at Ren. Ren looked at Trevor. Trevor said, "Any questions on that?" Ren said, "I have a thought, if that's okay." He nodded. "Protocol exists to protect people, staff and patrons," she said. "And I think the after-hours retrieval protocol is actually worth formalizing more explicitly, so the on-closing staff have clear guidance instead of having to make a call on their own." She paused. Ben was put in a difficult position. If the protocol had been clearer, he wouldn't have needed to phone anyone. There was a small silence. Trevor said, "That's a fair point. I'm happy to draft something if it would help." Ren said, "Sure," Trevor said. And then, because he was a man who processed things slightly after the moment they happened, "Yeah, that would help." June looked at Ren with the expression of someone watching a chess game and recognizing a particular kind of move. Ren called the board chair that evening. She stood in her kitchen, her real kitchen, the one in her actual apartment 20 minutes from the Dunmore Branch, surrounded by the books and the good lamp, and the particular organized quiet she had spent a long time building. And she said what she'd been composing for 3 days. "The branch is good," she said. "The core staff are strong. There are real gaps in leadership coverage, not because of bad intent but because of a management style that optimizes for smoothness over substance. Trevor Ashworth is capable and he knows the system, but he manages for optics. The gaps don't show up in his reports because he's good at making sure they don't show up. That's not dishonesty exactly. It's a particular kind of careful." The board chair was quiet for a moment. And he needs a direct supervisor who won't let that slide," Ren said. "Not someone to replace him. He's genuinely useful in the role. But someone who can require him to be in the room when the room needs him." "What about the branch overall?" Ren thought about Petra with the children's section, and Kwame and his 4-minute sources, and June with her 18 years of usage data. She thought about the man with the medical appointment, and the 12 minutes she'd spent at the computer station with him. She thought about Amaro C. standing on the other side of the glass in the cold. "The branch is doing more than the metrics show," she said. "The metrics measure what gets counted. A lot of what this team does doesn't get counted." The board chair said, "When are you planning to make the announcement?" "End of the week," Ren said. "I want to do it at the branch." She came in on Friday in the same cardigan, the same low knot, the same reading glasses. She arrived at 8:15 before the 9 o'clock opening and found Kwame and Petra already there, opening the building together the way they did every Friday. June would be in at noon. Ren asked Trevor to gather the staff at 9:30, before the doors opened to the public. She said she needed to share some information from administration. He looked at her with the particular expression of a person encountering a sentence that doesn't quite parse. "From administration? Yes," she said. "I should have introduced myself properly when I arrived." She paused. "I apologize for that." He was still looking at her when the last 2 part-time staff came in at 9:20. And the small team assembled in the reading nook near the periodicals. 6 people in a loose cluster, coffee cups, the particular low-level alertness of people who've been asked to a meeting without knowing what it's about. Ren stood in front of them. She didn't use notes. "My name is Ren Halliday," she said. 3 weeks ago I was appointed interim director of the Hargrove Public Library System. I've been working this branch for the past week and a half as a circulation staff member, at the board's request, as part of a quiet assessment before the formal announcement. I wanted to know what this branch actually looks like from the inside. Not from a report. She let that sit for a moment. Kwame set down his coffee very carefully. Petra made a sound that was not quite a word. Ben looked at Trevor. Trevor was looking at Ren. "I want to be clear about why I did it this way," Ren said. "It wasn't to catch anyone out. It wasn't to build a case or look for failures. I wanted to understand what you're actually doing here. What the work looks like before anyone prepares it for an audience." She looked around the group. "This branch is doing good work. The patron services here, particularly in reference and children's programming, are strong in ways that don't show up in the numbers we're currently capturing. I'm going to be asking you to help me figure out how to measure it better, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get funded." June nodded slowly. "There are also things I want to change," Ren continued. "Some of them are structural. Staffing coverage, the after-hours protocol, communication between the branch and central administration, which has been genuinely inadequate, and I take responsibility for that on behalf of the system." She paused. "Some of them are about how we work together. I'll be having individual conversations over the next 2 weeks." She looked at Trevor. He was still holding his clipboard. His face was doing something that was not quite any one emotion, not embarrassment, not relief, not defensiveness, but some specific amalgam of a person recalibrating in real time. "Trevor," she said, "I'd like to start with you. he said after a moment. Yeah? Okay, this afternoon? This afternoon, he said. The conversation with Trevor lasted an hour and 20 minutes. Wren had not prepared a list of grievances. She had prepared a list of questions. Genuine questions, the kind that couldn't be answered with a polished deflection. She asked him about the protocol call with Amara Osei's laptop bag. Not as an accusation. She asked him what his thinking had been. He was quiet for longer than she expected. Then he said, honestly, I didn't want to deal with it. It was end of day, it was technically Ben's call to escalate, and he stopped. I told myself it was about protocol. But it was easier than going back in. Wren wrote nothing. That bothers me, Trevor said. Now that I say it out loud, it should bother you a little, Wren said. Not a lot, but a little. He looked at her. I've been doing that thing, where you manage the appearance of things more than the things themselves. He said it like someone identifying a pattern they've been circling for a long time. I noticed you doing the opposite, every time this week. And I couldn't figure out if you were. He stopped again. I didn't know what you were. I'm the person responsible for this system now, Wren said. And I don't want to manage how it looks. I want to know what it actually is. Trevor was quiet for a moment, then, what does that mean for me? It means you're good at this job, she said. You know the operations here better than anyone. That's real and it's valuable. But I'm going to need you to be in the room when the room needs you. She let that land. Not performing presence, actually present. He held her gaze. Something in his posture shifted, not defeat. Something more like resolution. I can do that, he said. I believe you, she said. I'm going to hold you to it. The formal announcement went to all 6 branches the following Monday. The system-wide email, the press notice to the regional section of the paper, the staff meeting at Central Administration, where Wren sat at the head of the table in her real clothes. A tailored blazer, no cardigan, though she considered it, and answered questions for 45 minutes. The question that stayed with her came from a junior archivist near the back of the room, someone she didn't know yet, who raised her hand and said, "Why did you spend a week at the desk? Why not just read the reports?" Wren thought about the man with the medical appointment, and the scattered bookmarks, and Amara Osei in the cold outside the glass door. She thought about what June had said about 18 years of usage data and the woman who had told her someone should look at it. Because reports tell you what the system wants you to know, Wren said. I wanted to know what the system doesn't know about itself. The archivist wrote something down. Wren looked around the room, at the faces of people who had spent years doing work that was careful and unglamorous and largely invisible, and felt the particular weight of knowing that what happened next was substantially up to her. We have a lot of work to do, she said. Let's start. The apron she'd worn at the Dunmore Branch was still folded in her bag. She had meant to leave it at the desk when she went in on Friday, but she had walked out with it still tucked in her tote, and she hadn't taken it out since. She thought she might keep it for a while, not as a symbol of anything, just as a reminder of what the work felt like from the inside. The weight of it, the smallness of it, the way it mattered more than anyone standing on the outside would ever think to notice.